After years of feeling trapped in a busy city, with its constant noise and rush, a woman decided to make a change. She had always dreamed of living a simpler life, one where she could slow down, breathe easy, and feel in control of her surroundings. The city felt suffocating with its towering buildings and crowded streets, so she took a deep breath and decided to look for something entirely different. For months, she scrolled through online listings, hoping to find a place that would offer her peace and space. She wasn't looking for much, just a small home, something manageable. She had no interest in a big house with rooms she didn't need, or an expensive mortgage that would tie her down. She wanted freedom, and the idea of a tiny house kept calling to her. Tiny houses were becoming popular, especially among people who, like her, wanted to downsize. These homes were small but perfectly designed to maximize every inch of space. They had big windows to let in natural light, clever storage solutions, and the kind of coziness that felt inviting and warm. She imagined waking up in one of these homes every morning, surrounded by nothing but nature, the sounds of birds and rustling leaves filling the air. She found a few listings that caught her eye, but they were all in busy towns, and she didn't want to end up in another crowded area. Then one day, as she was scrolling through another set of homes, one particular listing stood out. It wasn't flashy or extravagant, but it felt right. A tiny house on a piece of land in a quiet part of the country. It wasn't new, but the pictures made it look charming, tucked away in a small clearing surrounded by trees. The price was surprisingly low, and that piqued her curiosity. Most of the tiny houses she had seen were much more expensive, but this one was affordable, and something about it felt like it was waiting for her. She contacted the seller right away and arranged a visit. When she arrived at the property, she was immediately drawn to its peaceful surroundings. There was a large meadow with tall grass swaying in the wind, and beyond that the forest began. The tiny house itself was nestled at the edge of the trees, looking almost like it had grown there, blending seamlessly with the natural landscape. It was small, just one floor, with a loft that would be perfect for a bed. The house was made from warm, natural wood, giving it a rustic feel. The roof had moss growing on it, and there were small hand-carved details on the door and windows that added character. A little porch at the front had a swing, and the whole place felt like it belonged in a fairy tale. She could already picture herself sitting on that porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise over the meadow. The seller was an older man, dressed in simple clothes, with a gentle face and a soft smile. He told her that he had lived in the house for many years but was moving to a smaller place in town. He seemed ready to let go of the property and was eager to find someone who would appreciate it as much as he had. His story was simple. He had built the house himself, using reclaimed wood and other materials he had gathered over time. It wasn't fancy, but it had a warmth and charm that couldn't be found in modern homes. The man mentioned that he hadn't lived there alone for a long time. His wife had passed away a few years ago, and his children had grown up and moved away. He said the house had been good to him, but now it was time to pass it on. He was hoping that whoever took it would feel the same connection to it that he had. She was sold. She didn't need to look any further. The house was everything she had dreamed of, and it felt like it had been waiting for her to come along. It wasn't just a house. It was a place for her to start fresh, to live a simpler, more peaceful life. She put in an offer that day. The price was lower than she expected, and it felt like a good deal. The seller was quick to accept, and everything moved along smoothly. There was a moment of hesitation, though, as she signed the paperwork. What if she was making a mistake? What if living in such a small space was harder than she imagined? But deep down, she knew she was ready for this change. The city had become too much, and she longed for a slower pace, the kind of life where time seemed to stretch out a little longer, where she could wake up to birds chirping instead of car horns. The deal was done, and soon the tiny house would be hers. The day she officially moved in, she could hardly contain her excitement. She loaded up her car with boxes and drove the few hours to her new home. When she pulled up to the house for the first time as its new owner, she felt a wave of satisfaction wash over her. This was it. This was her new beginning. The first few days in the tiny house were filled with simple pleasures. There was no rush to unpack. Instead, she spent time getting to know the house, figuring out where everything should go. The kitchen, though small, was perfect for her needs. The bathroom was tiny but efficient, and the loft area, though compact, would make a cozy bedroom. She marveled at the clever ways the space had been designed, with hidden nooks for storage and shelves built into the walls. It felt like a place where she could truly make herself at home. Even though the house was small, she found that it was exactly what she needed. The simplicity of it all brought her a sense of calm she hadn't realized she was missing. The days stretched out in front of her, filled with peaceful moments. There were no deadlines, no meetings, no hustle and bustle of the city. Here she could take her time. She could focus on what mattered most to her: peace, nature, and the freedom to live life on her own terms. But even as she settled into this new chapter of her life, there was a nagging feeling in the back of her mind. Something about the house felt off. It wasn't anything she could put her finger on, but there were little things that didn't seem quite right. She had noticed a trapdoor in the corner of the floor, hidden beneath an old rug. It was small, and the wood around it looked worn, like it had been untouched for years. At first, she thought it was just part of the house's charm, an old feature that didn't really have a purpose. But as she walked around the house, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. Why had the seller not mentioned the trapdoor? And why did it seem so carefully hidden? But life had a way of keeping her busy, and for the time being, she pushed these thoughts aside. She had a new life to build, a new chapter to write. She didn't need to dwell on strange details. The house, after all, was exactly what she had hoped for. The quiet of the countryside, the fresh air, and the simple life she had always wanted were finally hers. Little did she know, her decision to buy the tiny house would soon lead her down a path she never expected. One that would change everything. The first few weeks in the tiny house were everything she had hoped for. Each morning she woke up to the soft sound of birds singing outside her window. There was no rush, no need to get caught up in the busy world outside. It was as if time itself had slowed down. She could spend her morning sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun rise over the meadow. There was something so peaceful about it all, so simple, that it felt like she was living in a different world. The house itself was everything she needed. It was small, of course, but it was cozy in a way that larger homes could never be. Every space was used cleverly, every nook and cranny filled with purpose. The kitchen, though tiny, was perfect for one person, and the living area, with its warm wood floors and comfortable furniture, made her feel at home right away. The loft, where she had set up her bed, was just high enough for her to stretch out without hitting her head. She loved the smallness of it all. There was no wasted space, no clutter, just what she needed. The days were calm and the nights were peaceful. The quiet of the countryside was unlike anything she had ever known. She had grown up in a city where the noise never stopped, where the hum of traffic was always in the background. But here there were no horns honking, no sirens blaring. At night, the only sounds she could hear were the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional hoot of an owl. It was the perfect escape from the chaos of her old life. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was truly at peace. There was no pressure, no demands. The world outside seemed so far away, and she could focus on the small things that made her happy. Reading a book, tending to the tiny garden she had started, and simply enjoying the quiet. But even in this serene setting, there were moments of discomfort. Little things she hadn't noticed at first began to catch her attention. The trapdoor, for one. It had been there since the moment she moved in, and for some reason it seemed to call to her. She couldn't explain why, but every time she passed by it, she felt a pull, a curiosity that she couldn't shake. It was located in the corner of the main room under an old faded rug. The floor around it looked worn, like it had been used often but rarely seen. At first, she dismissed it. Maybe it was just a storage space, maybe it was a feature of the house that didn't need to be explored. But the more she thought about it, the more she couldn't ignore it. It wasn't like there was anything wrong with the house. It was everything she had hoped for. But something about that trapdoor seemed out of place. It was almost like the house was holding a secret, and the more time she spent there, the more she wanted to know what it was. She thought about asking the previous owner, the old man who had sold her the house. But there was something about him that made her hesitate. He had seemed so eager to sell, so ready to move on. When he had handed her the keys and said goodbye, he hadn't mentioned anything about the trapdoor. It was almost as if he wanted her to figure it out on her own. But curiosity was getting the best of her. So one afternoon, she decided to investigate. She moved the rug and knelt down by the trapdoor. It was an old wooden door, with a simple latch in the middle. The wood around it was darker than the rest of the floor, as if it had been there for years, maybe even decades. She wondered how long it had been since anyone had opened it. With a deep breath, she pulled the latch and carefully lifted the door. The hinges creaked and dust fell from the edges. It felt like opening a door to the past, as though the house was revealing something it had kept hidden for a long time. As the door swung open, she looked down into the small space beneath. At first it seemed empty, just dust and old wooden beams stretching down into the darkness. But as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she noticed something, a faint glint of metal. Her heart skipped a beat. She bent lower, her curiosity pushing her forward. Slowly, she reached down and brushed aside some of the dust. What she found shocked her. There, nestled in the corner of the compartment, was a small wooden box. It wasn't large, only about the size of a shoebox, but it was old and carefully placed, almost as if someone had meant for it to be discovered, but only at the right time. The box was plain, with no markings or signs of decoration. It was just a simple, unassuming box, but it felt heavy in her hands, as if it contained something important. She hesitated for a moment, unsure whether she should open it, but the pull of curiosity was too strong. With trembling hands, she lifted the lid. Inside, the box was filled with small metal objects. At first, she thought they were just old tools or trinkets, but as she took a closer look, she realized they were coins. Old coins, some gold, some silver, and some that looked as though they had been in circulation for hundreds of years. There were stacks of them, neatly arranged in rows, their edges worn smooth from years of handling. Alongside the coins were banknotes, folded and tied together with string. The notes were yellowed with age, and the print on them was faded, but it was clear that they weren't ordinary bills. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the treasure before her. It was unbelievable. How could this have been hidden here, in this tiny house? What was the story behind it all? She had no answers, but she knew one thing for sure. This was something significant, something that could change everything. The box wasn't just full of money. It felt like a piece of history, a secret left behind by someone who had lived here long before her. But who? And why had they hidden it so carefully, in a spot that only the most curious person would find? She closed the box and carefully put it back where she had found it, covering it with dust and replacing the rug. Her mind raced with questions. Was this some kind of treasure? Or was it a forgotten part of the house's history, left behind by the previous owner? She didn't know, but she couldn't ignore it anymore. The trapdoor, the box, the coins, it all seemed too strange to be a coincidence. For the rest of the day, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The house, once so familiar, now felt different. It was as though the walls were holding a secret, and she was the only one who knew it. But what did it mean? Why had the old man sold the house without mentioning the box? And why had he seemed so eager to leave? She knew she had to find out. There was no going back now. The days after finding the hidden box beneath the trapdoor were filled with a restless energy she couldn't shake. She kept telling herself it was nothing, just an old relic, maybe some forgotten valuables left behind by the previous owner. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. The coins, the banknotes, and the way the box had been hidden so carefully. There was a story behind it all. A story she felt compelled to uncover. Over the next few days, the house no longer felt like the peaceful sanctuary it once had. Every creak of the floorboards seemed louder than before. Every rustle of the wind outside felt like it carried a whisper, urging her to dig deeper. She had opened the box, but she hadn't fully examined its contents. There were too many questions, too many unknowns. What if there was something important hidden there? What if there was something more, something she was meant to find? Her mind was in overdrive, running through every possible scenario. The banknotes in the box had looked old, way older than anything she had ever seen. Some of the coins were foreign, and some of the bills were printed in designs she didn't recognize. They seemed to be from a time long past. But why would anyone hide such a fortune in a tiny house, in a rural area far from any city? And why? Would the previous owner, An old man who had seemed so kind and genuine never mention it? She knew she needed answers, but she wasn't sure where to start. Her first thought was to go back and talk to the man who had sold her the house. But there was something about his sudden eagerness to sell that made her hesitate. The way he had handed her the keys with barely a word, as if he couldn't wait to be rid of the place. It didn't sit right with her. He hadn't seemed like a man with a secret. But maybe that was the point. Maybe he didn't want anyone to know. It wasn't long before her curiosity got the best of her. One afternoon, feeling the weight of the mystery press down on her, she decided to visit the town nearby. The town was small, with only a few shops and a handful of people. It wasn't a place that attracted much attention, which was exactly what she had wanted when she moved there. But now she was starting to realize that the town might hold more answers than she had originally thought. The local library seemed like a good place to start. It was tucked away on a quiet street, its stone walls covered with ivy. As she walked through the door, the smell of old books greeted her, and she felt a strange sense of comfort. The library was small, but the shelves were packed with books about the area's history, its people, and the strange events that had occurred over the years. It was exactly the kind of place she needed, where stories lived, hidden in dusty pages. She approached the front desk, where an older woman sat, her glasses perched on the end of her nose as she read a book. The woman looked up and smiled, greeting her warmly. After a quick exchange, the woman suggested she look through the local archives, a collection of old documents that might hold some clues. With the librarian's guidance, she made her way to the back of the library, where the archives were kept. The room smelled musty, filled with old newspapers and yellowed maps. She began flipping through some of the old newspapers, searching for anything that might connect to the house or to the previous owner. After an hour of sifting through the papers, she found something that made her stop. It was a small article tucked in the corner of a page dated decades ago. The headline read, "Mysterious Disappearance of Local Antique Dealer." Her heart skipped a beat. Could this be about the old man who had sold her the house? The article detailed the strange disappearance of a man who had been well known in the town years before. The man had been an antique dealer, someone who had a reputation for collecting rare and valuable items, but one day he vanished without a trace. His shop was left abandoned, and no one seemed to know what had happened to him. Some speculated that he had simply gotten tired of his life and left. Others whispered that something more sinister was at play. She read the article over and over, trying to make sense of it. The name wasn't mentioned, but the description of the man matched the one she had met when buying the house. The article spoke of a man who had lived alone for years, someone who had once been a well-respected figure in the town but had become more and more reclusive as time went on. Could it be that the man who had sold her the house was the same one mentioned in the article? Could he have been hiding from something? And what did that mean for the treasure she had found in the house? As the realization hit her, she felt a chill run down her spine. The coins, the box, the hidden trapdoor, it all seemed to be part of something bigger, something connected to the man's past. But what was the connection? Why had he left it all behind? And more importantly, why had he sold the house to her? She continued reading the article, hoping for some clue that would shed light on the situation. But as she reached the end, the article left more questions than answers. The last line of the piece mentioned that the man had once owned a collection of rare antiques, many of which had gone missing after his disappearance. It also mentioned that some of his belongings had been found in a nearby forest, abandoned and untouched. Could the hidden box in the tiny house have once been part of that collection? The more she thought about it, the more it seemed like a possibility. But it raised even more questions. Why would the man have hidden the treasure in the tiny house of all places? Was he trying to keep it safe? Or was there something more he was hiding, something dangerous? With the article in her hand, she left the library, feeling more uncertain than ever. The mystery had only deepened. She knew she had to go back to the house to search for more clues, but this time she wasn't just looking for coins or old banknotes. She was searching for the truth behind the box and its connection to the man who had once lived there. That night she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the puzzle. The answers were just out of reach, but she could feel them pulling her toward the next step. She knew she couldn't stop now. The mystery was bigger than the house. bigger than the coins, bigger than anything she had imagined. It was about the past, about secrets long buried, and about a man who had left something behind, something that needed to be found. As the night stretched on, she made a decision. Tomorrow she would return to the house, and this time she would dig deeper. She would uncover whatever it was the house was trying to tell her. She wasn't afraid anymore. The questions needed answers, and she was determined to find them. The next morning she woke up with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in weeks. The past few days had been a whirlwind of thoughts and discoveries, and now she was ready to dig deeper. There was no turning back. The mystery of the hidden box, the coins, the connection to the old man, it all felt too important to ignore. She had a plan. She was going back to the house, but this time, she was going to search every corner, every crack, every room. She wasn't just going to live in the house anymore. She was going to understand it, to uncover what it was hiding. She wasn't sure what she would find, but she knew that something important was waiting for her. The morning air was fresh and crisp as she drove to the house. The sun was low, casting a golden light over the meadow. The quiet of the countryside was comforting, but it couldn't shake the tension she felt in her chest. She wasn't just looking for old treasures anymore. She was looking for answers. Answers to the questions that had been nagging at her for days. When she arrived, the house looked the same as always. The small, charming cottage stood quietly at the edge of the trees, its warm wooden exterior glowing in the early light. It felt like home, but now it also felt like a place full of secrets. The trapdoor, the box, the old man, all of it was part of something bigger, something she needed to understand. She walked inside and stood in the middle of the room, taking it all in. The furniture, the kitchen, the cozy little loft, all of it had felt like a peaceful retreat when she first moved in. But now everything seemed different. It was as if the house itself was trying to tell her something, and she had to listen carefully to understand. Her eyes drifted to the corner where the trapdoor was hidden beneath the rug. She hadn't touched it since that first discovery. The box was still there, tucked away safely, waiting to be uncovered again. But this time, she wasn't just going to stop at the box. She was going to look for more clues. She had a feeling there was more to this house than just hidden treasure. First, she decided to search the rest of the house. She started with the kitchen, opening every drawer and cabinet looking for anything out of place. It was mostly what she had already seen: dishes, utensils, a few jars of spices. But in the back of one of the cabinets, behind a stack of old plates, she found something odd: a small weathered journal. The cover was faded, but it looked like it had been opened many times. She pulled it out carefully, the pages crinkling under her fingers. The journal was handwritten, filled with small, neat handwriting. It looked old, much older than the house itself. She flipped through the pages, reading bits and pieces of the entries. Most of it was mundane. Notes about the weather, about repairs to the house, and about the man's daily life. But as she read on, she found something that made her stop. One of the entries mentioned the collection of rare antiques the man had once owned. It spoke about the importance of keeping certain things hidden, of not letting anyone know about the treasures stored away in the house. It mentioned how difficult it was to part with some of the pieces, but how necessary it was to keep them safe. The man had written that the time would come when someone would find them, someone who would know their worth. Her heart raced as she read those words. This journal was a key. It was part of the mystery, part of the puzzle she had been trying to solve. The journal didn't just mention the hidden treasures. It suggested that the man had known that someone, maybe even her, would one day come looking for answers. It was as if he had left a trail for her to follow, a trail that would lead her to something much bigger than a box of coins. She tucked the journal under her arm and moved on to the next room. There was a small bedroom in the back of the house, one that the man had used before he left. It was sparse, just a bed and a small dresser. But as she opened the drawers, she found something unexpected: a stack of old letters. The letters were tied together with string, their edges yellowed with age. They were handwritten just like the journal, and the handwriting was familiar. She carefully untied the string and read the first letter. It was dated many years ago, before the man had disappeared. The letter was addressed to him, but there was no return address. The handwriting was elegant, almost too perfect. The letter spoke of a deal, a business arrangement. It mentioned that the man had something valuable, something that could change the course of history. It spoke of a partnership, a promise to keep the item hidden until the right moment. The letter didn't make much sense at first, but the more she read, the more she understood. Whoever had written the letter knew about the treasures hidden in the house, and they had made a deal with the man to keep them safe. The letter also mentioned that the man would need to leave the area, to disappear for a while. There was talk of danger, of people looking for the collection. The man had been warned. It all started to fall into place. The man hadn't just left the house because he wanted a simpler life. He had left because he was protecting something that people were willing to do anything to get their hands on. He had hidden the treasures away to keep them safe, to keep them from falling into the wrong hands. But why had he sold the house to her? She wasn't a collector, wasn't someone who would know the value of the items. Could it be that the man had known she would come looking? Had he left the house for her, trusting that she would find the hidden treasures and uncover the story behind them? The more she thought about it, the more questions arose. But there was one thing she knew for sure. The house held something important, something that had been hidden for a reason. She wasn't just living in a simple house in the countryside. She was part of a story that had started long before she arrived. With the journal and the letters in hand, she returned to the main room, her mind spinning with new information. It was time to go back to the trapdoor. She had found enough clues to know that the house was hiding more than just coins. She had to go deeper to uncover the rest of the story. She knelt down and moved the rug again, exposing the trapdoor. She felt a strange sense of anticipation, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for her to find what was hidden below. She lifted the trapdoor once more, the hinges creaking as it swung open. She descended the wooden stairs into the darkness below, her heart pounding in her chest. At the bottom of the stairs, she found another compartment, this one larger than the one she had opened before. There were old crates stacked along the walls, and in the center of the room was a large chest, its surface covered in dust. She approached it slowly, her fingers trembling as she reached for the lid. When she opened the chest, her eyes widened in shock. Inside were not just more coins or banknotes, but artifacts old and intricately designed. There were jewels, a necklace with a large, sparkling gemstone, an ancient ring with strange symbols etched into it, and a collection of ornate golden trinkets. The chest was full of valuable items, each one more stunning than the last. It was clear now. The man had been hiding more than just money. He had been safeguarding a collection of rare, priceless items. And it was all hidden in this tiny house beneath the trapdoor, waiting for someone to find it. But why had he kept it all a secret? What had he been trying to protect? And who would come looking for these items now that they were uncovered? As she stared at the chest, the weight of the situation sank in. The house was no longer just her home. It was a treasure trove, a piece of history, and she was the one who had stumbled upon it. The story was only beginning. The room below the trapdoor felt like a different world. As she stared at the chest of treasures, her mind raced with 1,000 questions. The artifacts inside were extraordinary, pieces that looked like they belonged in a museum, not in a small, quiet house at the edge of a forest. She ran her fingers over the delicate engravings on the jewelry, the smoothness of the gemstones and the intricate patterns on each piece. It was as if the chest contained not just valuable items, but also the stories of those who had once owned them, stories she could only begin to imagine. Her heart was pounding. She wasn't sure what to do next. She had uncovered so much already. Coins, letters, the journal, and now this chest. Everything pointed to the man who had once lived here. But the question remained, why had he left all of this behind? Why had he sold her the house knowing she would eventually find it? She closed the chest gently, not wanting to disturb the contents just yet. The discovery was overwhelming, but she knew she needed to keep a clear head. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but there were still so many gaps. She couldn't afford to let her emotions take over. She had to be logical, to think through every step carefully. As she sat on the floor surrounded by the relics, she realized something crucial. The man had never really disappeared. Not completely. She had assumed he had left the area for good, perhaps even fled to escape the attention the collection might attract. But now, with everything she had found, it seemed like he had been protecting the treasures all along. He hadn't just vanished without a trace. He had made sure that whoever found the house, whoever stumbled upon the secrets hidden beneath the floor, would be someone capable of understanding their value. But who was this man really? The more she thought about it, the more she realized she didn't know nearly as much about him as she thought. She had always assumed that he was just a quiet, reclusive person, a man who had lived alone and decided to leave everything behind. But the things she had uncovered didn't fit that picture. This wasn't just a man who had sold a house. This was someone who had been involved in something far bigger than she could have imagined. The letters, the journal, the treasure, they all suggested that the man had known he would eventually need to disappear. He had been preparing for this moment, hiding away his most valuable possessions and leaving behind clues for someone who would eventually find them. But why? Was it possible that he had been involved in something dangerous, something that had made it necessary for him to go into hiding? She sat in silence, reflecting on everything she had learned over the past few days. Her life had changed so quickly, and the house that had seemed so simple and peaceful now felt like a puzzle she couldn't solve. But the more she thought about it, the more certain she became. The house wasn't just a place to live. It was a key to a larger story that she was only just beginning to understand. Her thoughts were interrupted by a faint noise, a sound that seemed to come from the direction of the front door. For a moment she froze, unsure of what she had heard. It was almost like a knock, but softer, more tentative. She stood up, her heart racing once again. It was probably nothing, she thought. Maybe the wind had caused something to shift, or perhaps an animal had brushed against the door. But deep down she couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that. She had uncovered so many secrets in the past few days, and now it seemed like someone else was about to play a part in this unfolding mystery. Cautiously, she made her way to the front door. Her hand hovered over the doorknob, and for a moment she hesitated. Was she ready to face whatever was on the other side? What if it was someone who knew about the treasures? Someone who had been looking for them just as long as she had? What if it was someone dangerous? Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. Standing in front of her was a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, with a weathered face and dark eyes that seemed to look right through her. He wore a long coat despite the warmth of the day, and his posture was tense, like someone who had been traveling for a long time. "I need to speak with you," he said in a low voice. She felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't know who this man was, but she could sense that he wasn't just a random passerby. He was here for a reason, and that reason was tied to the secrets of the house. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the anxiety bubbling up inside her. The man glanced around quickly, his eyes flicking to the surrounding trees and then back to her. "I can't explain everything right now. But you found something, haven't you? Something hidden beneath the floor." Her heart skipped a beat. How did he know? The chest, the box, the coins, had someone been watching her? Had someone known all along? I don't know what you're talking about, she said, trying to play it cool, though she could feel the tension building in her chest. The man's eyes narrowed, and he stepped closer, his voice lowering to a whisper. "The collection, the one you found, it's not just valuable, it's dangerous, and it's not meant to fall into the wrong hands." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Dangerous? What did that mean? The artifacts, the coins, they had seemed harmless enough. But now she wasn't so sure. Who was this man? And why did he want to speak to her about the collection? Was he involved in whatever had caused the previous owner to go into hiding? "I don't understand," she said, her voice shaking. "Why is it dangerous? What do you want from me?" The man sighed, glancing over his shoulder before stepping closer to her. "I've been looking for that collection for years. The man who hid it, he made a deal. He was supposed to keep it safe, keep it from people who would use it for the wrong reasons. But now that it's been found, everything is at risk. And you're the one who's found it." She took a step back, her mind racing. The house had always felt like a sanctuary, a place to escape from the chaos of the world. But now it seemed like it was a battleground, a place where people were willing to go to extreme lengths to get what they wanted. The man wasn't just looking for treasure. He was looking for something more, something that could change everything. "I don't know what you're talking about," she repeated, her voice firm. "I don't want anything to do with whatever this is." The man's eyes softened just for a moment. "You don't have a choice. You've already found it, and now the only way to protect it is to make sure it stays hidden." Her head spun. She didn't know whether to trust this man or run far, far away. But something about his words, something about the way he had spoken, told her that he wasn't the one she needed to fear. The real danger was something else, something much larger than either of them. "Come inside," she said quietly. "We need to talk." The man nodded, stepping inside the house. And as she closed the door behind him, she knew that everything had changed. The house, the treasure, the journal, the letters, it was all part of something bigger, something that would change her life forever. The real story was just beginning, and she was now at the center of it all.